Witchcraft today has become quite a fickle thing. Mention curses, hexes, or baneful forms of magic in online witchcraft groups or even at many a local gathering or moot, and you will be met with stern talks regarding karma, the threefold law, or this concept of harming none. Now, while I think it's admirable to try and live a life where you harm none, even though I don't fully believe that that is completely possible, I think it's fine to personally feel uncomfortable with the idea of cursing or utilising magic for baneful purposes. But some go as far as to make bold claims that real witches don't curse and that cursing is not a true part of witchcraft, and I think that's a little bit of an avoidance of witchcraft's actual history. To do this, to claim that real witches do not curse and that those who do are somehow living morally incorrectly, ignores a deeply intriguing and interesting aspect of the history of witchcraft and folk magic, and also ignores a vital aspect of why magic has been used for centuries by so many people. The witches, folk magical specialists and magicians of the past were known for their curses, especially here in Wales. Welcome to my channel. My name is mhara.starling. I'm a Welsh folk witch, and today we're going to be delving into curses and cursing traditions that stem and originate from Wales. Here on my channel we discuss all things to do with the magical culture of Wales. So today let's talk about curses. Witchcraft and folk magic, in my opinion, when looked at from a historical perspective or through a historical lens, is often utilised as the art of the oppressed and underprivileged. When you hold no materialistic power in this world, magic is sometimes the one thing that we can turn to turn the tables, so to speak, the tables of our own fate. Today I'm going to be outlining some traditional folk magical forms of baneful magic, curses, and specifically magic meant to cause harm or distress. In this video I will be focusing primarily on folk magic and folklore surrounding magic and witchcraft from Wales, and not mythology, such as the Mabinogi. So we won't be analysing curses and baneful forms of magic found in mythology and Welsh literature today. More so folk magic and folklore, the history of folk magic and the folkloric concept of magic in Wales. Though if you would like to see more videos about magic from the mythological traditions of Wales, do let me know, because it would be really fun to do a video all about magic in the Mabinogi or magic in Welsh mythology. So why am I doing this video? Why am I talking about curses of all things? Well, first and foremost, I think a lot of these practices are deeply intriguing. I'm a rather macabre person, and I love looking into the darker aspects of life. And so when I learn about the cursing practices of Wales, I think it's just rather entertaining. It's also very educational if you're a witch, and I think it's interesting to look into the wide array of folk magical customs and traditions and not just look at it from a one-sided perspective and through our moral lens today. So a little bit of a disclaimer before we go forward. This is not truly meant to be used as a how-to video. This is not a video of me teaching you how to perform Welsh curses, unfortunately. This is more of a historical and folkloric exploration, a look into these practices from a Welsh context. However, I will point out that I am a folk witch, and I do believe that sometimes, in very specific circumstances, baneful magic can be utilised, and I don't think there's anything morally wrong with doing so. I think it's important to explore morals for yourself, and it's important to recognise that concepts such as the threefold law, harm none, and karma didn't really exist within the cultural context of Wales in the past. And also, when we look at practices such as these as almost like a form of protection, as a way of alleviating oneself of the harm others might cause, then we look at it from a different lens. But even so, I think a lot of witches today do not take the time to consider their morals and instead just repeat things that they've heard over and over again, such as harm none. So please, I would rather there was no preaching about karma or the threefold law in the comments. If you do not like the idea of cursing and baneful magic, then either watch this video purely as an informational insight into the cursing traditions of Wales, or move along, find a video that gels more with your interests. So without further ado, let's get started. In the Welsh book Coelion Cymru, published in 1938, Evan Isaac, the author, states that cursing was quite the feminine art in Wales, being more so associated with women than with men, and this is echoed in much of Welsh history surrounding curses. Most presentments for cursing within the Welsh courts in the 17th century were against women. Women were the ones who seemed to be cursing the most. Cursing could be performed in numerous methods. It was expressed in numerous ways in Wales, from spoken curses to more ritualised curses that included physical displays, such as falling to the knees and occasionally flashing certain body parts, which we will talk more about later, right through to sympathetic forms of magic, utilising image magic, cursing wells, slate tablets, animal sacrifices, and puppets and dolls. So let's begin our exploration of cursing traditions from Wales by examining some recorded forms of cursing in history. So the first thing we're going to talk about is spoken curses utilising the spoken word. Cursing by spoken incantation or prayer was common in late medieval and early modern Wales, and this is not at all surprising when you consider that spoken blessings were also popular in this time. Charms, blessings, and protective incantations were very much utilised across Wales at this period as well. So it's not at all surprising that there were some elements of the spoken tradition of magic that was used to harm. Charms and prayers calling upon the virtue and powers of God, the saints, angels, biblical figures, and even natural things was a part of everyday life in Wales during this period, and so it's not surprising that a contrasting version of this phenomena, where the same elements were called upon to curse rather than to bless, was also a thing. Now, to those of us alive today with our modern sensibilities, if we were to hear some of these spoken curses, we would likely dismiss them as simply being Christian prayers. A spoken curse would usually be a petitionary prayer to God, to celestial entities, saints, or biblical figures, to rain down terror and harm towards the victim. Occasionally, just as with charms and blessings of old Wales, the curser would call upon an elemental force to enact the curse as well. Most often when it comes to cursing, it was the element of fire that was called upon. Fire seems to be connected with this idea of cursing. Examples of curses of this nature might be a curse that God would send wildfire from heaven to consume an enemy's house or an enemy's body. Some people might use the spoken word to curse intruders that might try and intrude upon their home. There were curses that were used to shun and make people be seemingly worthless within the community. And there were also curses that would bring harm upon cattle and animals in general, because people usually relied upon their livestock during this period as well. So as I have just mentioned, curses was sometimes uttered as a form of protective magic, to protect the home from intruders or thieves, for example. Now, an example of such a curse is outlined in Richard Suggett's A History of Witchcraft and Magic in Wales, and goes as follows. Mechtydd Duw i'r neb a ddelo i'm tu I o manfodd, na chaffo byth gam rhwdd, na byth rhywdeb, nag iechyd a gymheron hi I. Which translates to, the curse of God on anyone who dares come into my house against my will. He who takes my house shall never have an easy step, prosperity, nor good health. Now, some people would curse their enemies upon their deathbed, and a curse uttered by a person just before they died was considered in Wales to be one of the most potent and powerful curses. For good reason, I believe. Would you want to be cursed by someone's dying breath? It was also believed that witches, or those learned in the arts of magic, would curse those who were unkind to them. So, for example, there are numerous folk tales of people being unkind to poor women and beggars who came to the door asking for milk or food or money. And then the beggar or poor woman would curse the one who displayed this lack of kindness and compassion. They would utter a curse as they left, and the curse would often be against the family's greatest asset. For example, if you made money selling butter, they would curse your milk to always curdle and produce no good butter. uttered curses, spoken recited curses. They were often deeply dark and twisted within the Welsh cultural context. It was rare for a curse to wish simple death upon an enemy. Instead, Welsh curses would chip away at a victim's life slowly, painfully, and horrifically. An example of this tradition of ruthless, twisted cursing is the folkloric example of the Gwrachod Llandonna, the witches of Llandonna. According to the legend of Gwrachod Llandonna, a group of people were cast out into a rickety boat into the sea from their home country due to their nature as curses or evil malefic witches. The boat was pulled onto shore at Llandonna on Anglesey, and the people of Llandonna initially wanted to send them back out to sea, fearing that they were indeed horrible witches. But with their magic, these boat people conjured up a well of fresh water, and the village folk allowed them to stay for this miracle. But of course, as all good stories go, it didn't really end well, and these people caused all manners of trouble with their curses and malefic nature afterwards. One of the curses outlined in the tale goes like this: Crwydro y byddo am oesoedd lawer, ac am mhob cam, camfa, ac am mhob camfa, codwm, ym mhob codwm torri asgwrn. Nid yr asgwrn mwyaf na'r lleiaf, ond asgwrn chwil corneu wddw bob tro. The translation of that curse goes as follows: He shall wander for many years, and at each stile he shall stumble. Every time he stumbles, he shall hurt himself. Every time he hurts himself, he will break a bone. Not the biggest or smallest bone, but the chief neck bone every time. Now, as we can see from this curse, the incantation does not wish simple death or illness upon the victim, but constant, consistent suffering and pain throughout the victim's life. Welsh curses were rather badass, if I might say so. Now, these spoken words were occasionally fused with physical displays and ritualized movements, which leads us on from the spoken word as curse to the more ritualized version of cursing. These physical displays usually involved raising the arms to the heavens, falling to their knees, and petitioning to the heavens as they recited these spoken curses. And of course, as I said earlier, most of these curses were carried out by women. Now, on occasion, these ritualized forms of cursing, which were more commonly carried out by women, included the flashing of certain body parts for an extra dramatic flair. Now, quite a while back now, I posted a tongue-in-cheek tweet stating Welsh women used to curse people by pulling out their tits and shouting profanities at their victim. It's sad how we let traditions die, isn't it? This tweet really made the rounds. I found this tweet being reshared on numerous websites and social media pages. The interesting thing was the reaction that I got from fellow Welsh people for sharing this tweet. Some Welsh people were absolutely outraged by my words. "That is not true," they would cry. "There is no evidence to support this claim, and I've never heard of such a thing, so it can't be true." Other Welsh people, however, embraced it and found it rather comical, and would also say that if you went on a night out to Cardiff or to Swansea, you would still see this tradition being carried out on a Saturday night. So where did this idea come from? Did Welsh women actually curse people with their boobs, or did I make it all up? Well, I did not make it all up. I actually found reference to this strange practice in the writing of Richard Sugget, who is probably the leading expert when it comes to the history of witchcraft and magic in Wales. Sugget references that this was indeed a practice that occasionally took place. One example is a story from Mawddwy. In this historical account, a woman's two sons, who were purportedly part of the Gwylltiad Cochion, a band of red-headed thieves and scoundrels, were being persecuted by the law. The mother of these two sons pleaded with the man persecuting them to spare them, or at least spare one of them. When this request was denied, the curse began. The mother of these two sons dropped to her knees, bared her breasts, clutched them and shouted at him, "These yellow breasts have given suck to those who shall wash their hands of your blood." Funnily enough, the man she cursed was supposedly murdered not long after by her children. The lesson? Don't get on the wrong side of a Welsh woman. Yes, women were seen as ruthless cursers in Welsh culture. The most notorious and powerful cases regarding curses in Wales were those that crossed the boundaries of gender and social class. A woman cursing a man was considered a very powerful curse indeed, but a poor woman cursing a rich or noble man, well, honey, there's a storm coming. Let's move on now to talk about cursing wells, slate and image magic. Another interesting aspect of Welsh history and cursing lore was the utilisation of cursing wells. Throughout Welsh history, certain wells were considered bestowed with rather magical virtue. Holy wells were said to be able to heal the sick, and certain wells were said to be powerful spaces to perform certain forms of divination. However, there was a more diabolical version of this holy, sacred nature attributed to wells. In the late 18th century, some wells were desecrated and used not for healing, but for harm. They were cursing wells. So how did it work? How did people use these cursing wells? People would travel from all over, not just all over Wales, but also from England. They would travel as far as from England to some of these cursing wells in order to rain some hellfire upon their enemies. In order to curse someone, the well demanded an offering, and these offerings were usually coins or pieces of silver. Once the offering had been made, then the person would go ahead and perform their curse. Now, the curse was carried out via a form of image magic, so people would carve a wax effigy or puppet of the person that they wished to curse. They would then place this wax effigy or puppet onto a piece of slate, and on that piece of slate they would have the victim's initials. The wax figure on the piece of slate would then be thrown into the well with a malediction, and thus that person was said to be cursed. This practice was so notorious that some wells, such as Ffynnon Eilian on Ynys Môn, the Isle of Anglesey, were completely destroyed due to their notoriety as cursing wells. The wax figure on the piece of slate is reminiscent of various forms of image magic that we see across various cultures, a sympathetic form of magic where one would create the image of the person they were cursing and do nasty things to it. Beyond their use in cursing wells, we see the utilisation of wax and clay puppets or effigies for cursing in various historical records and folktales from Wales as well. I find it rather intriguing that slate tended to be used quite frequently in cursing traditions. Another example of slate being used is a cursing tradition that involves doing rather diabolical things to a toad. So if you're sensitive to the idea of animals being hurt by humans, this account may not be best suited for you and you may wish to click away for a moment. Another cursing tradition was the toad stuck with pins or nails curse. The idea was that you stuck a toad full of pins or sometimes nails, and then you placed that toad in a pipkin or a pot, and then you would inscribe the name of your victim on a piece of slate and use that piece of slate as a topper for the pot. Once you had done that, the pot, slate topper, and its contents would have to be hidden somewhere secret. The victim, the person that you'd put the name of on the pot, would then be cursed, and the curse would worsen as the body of the toad that is now stuck with pins or nails decayed. The only way to break this curse, if you were the victim of it, was to find the pot and destroy it. However, in some cases, the toad was thrown onto a fire as part of this cursing ritual, and so there was no way to alleviate yourself of this curse. Now, this is a pipkin pot that was used for this very purpose. This was found in a wall in Holyhead, Anglesey, in the 19th century. If you're in North Wales, you can actually go see this cursing pot in Storiel in Bangor. As you can ascertain from this video so far, cursing or baneful magic was a rather apparent part of the magical culture of Wales, and this video is only just scratching the surface. Before we wrap this video up, let's discuss Welsh terminology surrounding the practice of cursing. A curse in Welsh is melltith, which the Geiriadur Prifysgol Cymru, the University of Wales dictionary, defines as meaning curse, malediction, ruin, or misfortune. A cursed person or thing was said to be melltigedig. However, beyond the common words used in Welsh to describe curses, there are also terms specific to magical practices that involve cursing. The practice of magic, sorcery, or enchantment was, of course, hydoliaeth, or swyn gyfaredd. But there was actually a word to describe malefic forms of magic as well. Rheibio. Rheibio, the act of cursing, or a rheib, a curse, does indeed mean to curse, but it is specifically the magical practice of causing harm via magic. It is probably the closest Welsh word to the early modern English understanding of witchcraft, if we are to look at the early modern definition of witchcraft as being a practice that utilises magic in order to harm. To practice the art of rheibio was to practice malefic, wicked forms of magic, used to harm or even kill an enemy. A woman who practiced these darker forms of magic was known as a rheibies, whereas a man was a rheibiwr. Now, every time I talk about this word, rheibies, rheibwr, rheibio, I often get comments from people saying, hey, that's very similar to the English word for rabies. I have never personally found a connection between the word rabies and the word rheibio, or rheibies. However, rheibio at essence derives from words meaning to devour, to ravage, to bewitch, and to curse. It is a word that is predatory in nature, a word that is deeply malicious. To learn more about Welsh magical terminology, check out my other videos. I've done quite a few videos now on Welsh magical terminology, words that you can use to describe magic and magical practice in Welsh. And that is all that we will cover today. I hope you have enjoyed this video delving into some of the cursing and malefic versions of magic found in Wales. Let me know in the comments, what did you think of this style of video? Would you like more videos on Welsh folk magic and magical lore? Perhaps you'd like a video exploring magic or certain types of magic found within Welsh mythology too. I'm always open to video suggestions, so if you have an idea of what you'd like to see a video about, I am more than happy to try and accommodate so long as I know something about what you're asking, of course. If you enjoyed this video, then why not consider supporting me on Patreon? You can support me for as little as £1 a month, and it helps me keep putting these videos out there, it helps me keep writing, and it helps me keep putting as much content across all of social media. If you join some of my higher tiers on Patreon, you get access to exclusive content, with so much more exclusive content on the way in the next coming months. However, if you cannot afford to support me on Patreon right now, don't forget to click that subscribe button here and follow me elsewhere on social media. It's completely free to do so. You can find me on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok, and pretty much everywhere. Just search mhara.starling. And of course, don't forget to buy my book, Welsh Witchcraft, A Guide to the Spirits, Lore and Magic of Wales, is out now. So if you're interested in the magical traditions of Wales, do check that out. And if you've already read the book, don't forget to leave me a review over on Amazon or Goodreads. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bedithion ddisglair ydych chi gyd. Magical blessings upon you all. See you soon. Bye!